I'm not sure that I can begin to tell you how pleased we are to have you here today. And we're pleased for a number of reasons, and I'll read from that New York Times article, if I may. Andrew Williams, a spokesman for the Treasury Department, called the figures distorted because they did not consider the value of collateral posted on these loan programs. I'd like you to put into perspective, first of all, did you ever say anywhere in your report or in your findings that we would lose $23.7 trillion?
Of course not. And we explicitly point out in the report the existence of collateral.
So when you talk about $23.7 trillion, or about 30 times as much money as you would have if you gave away $1 million a year from the birth of Christ till today, just for somebody to try to figure out if that's true or not, that quantity of money, what you're talking about is the amount, other than the $700 billion, the amount that's essentially under assurances and insurance. Is that right?
If every program is maximized to the greatest extent possible, that's what that number is. And coming from a slightly different persuasion, I would say even if you went back to the time that Moses parted the Red Sea, you would still be in the right numbers.
I think actually Abraham would be sitting here trying to figure it out too. There's no question. This is an amazing amount of money that when you look at millions over thousands of years and not getting to that number, it's hard for people to understand. But let's look at it another way. If in fact just 5% of this 23 trillion, 24 trillion under assurances of various sorts were to go bad, isn't that a dramatic amount more than we ever authorized or appropriated from Congress?
It is of course a staggeringly large number. The TARP itself are staggeringly large numbers as they've been expanded through other programs as well.
Now, a previous Neil came before us, Neil Kashkari, and we asked him about how much money the assets were worth, and he said he didn't know, but he'd get it to us in 30 days. And 30 days later, he said he'd get us another 30 days. He's gone now. So you're the one we have. Has the Treasury been willing to cooperate and provide the information as to the current value of assets purchased? This is a recommendation we've made since early February, and they've not yet made this information public. So the assurances made by Neil Kashkari, both in the last Congress and in this Congress, that this was forthcoming, in fact, were not truthful in the sense that it doesn't appear as though they were ever forthcoming to actually tell us in a, if you will, a mark-to-market, what the assets are worth. Particularly, I'm interested in AIG's assets. Do you have any idea how much money has evaporated permanently from the $180 billion that AIG has received?
I don't have that information at my fingertips. We're doing a couple of audits on AIG where we're going to have a better sense and be able to report on what's going on in those portfolios, particularly in the context of its counterparty transactions, but I don't have that information.
Do you think that Congress is overdue to find out how many dollars have gone out in a manner that can never be refunded?
I think it's absolutely essential for transparency that Congress and the taxpayers who invest in this program know what Treasury's best estimate is as to what the value of their investment is. Absolutely.
Now, because we own AIG and because there is litigation against the founder of AIG, and you're obviously very familiar with the court decision and apparently follow-on litigation, do you have any day-to-day contact or any ability to find out why we continue to spend, my understanding is over $200 million in legal fees, trying to recover initially $4 billion, which the court has said we're not entitled to get back from CV Starr and Company. As a matter of fact, apparently they said it in very short time and said that, you know, essentially the case never had merit, but we've spent over $200 million. Is that something that's on your radar screen?
We haven't addressed that situation. We have 2 ongoing audits of AIG, which is consuming a good chunk of my audit staff. But of course, we're always going to be continuing to look for follow-up aspects. We're also, though, may be included as well in an overall audit that we've just recently announced. We're doing on corporate governance as a whole, including the government's role in governing and as part of an 80% owner of AIG. So it may come in that context as well.
Is there any way that we can get an independent assessment of whether or not the Federal Government's pursuit of these lawsuits rather than going to binding arbitration, which was offered repeatedly when Mr. Greenberg was before this committee. Is there any way to guess this as $1 million a week is being spent on legal fees?
I think what we can bring through our audits is an explanation of what the Federal Government's involvement has been in those decisions. In other words, as an 80% owner, how involved is the Federal Government in making those decisions versus AIG's management itself?
Okay, now back to the firewall question that you've been working on and this committee is very concerned about. I'm a member of a public board. I own stock. Actually, my foundation owns stock in that. I'm not allowed to trade that during blind periods. Is it any different to say that a member of Congress who happens to have a foundation which owns stock but also sits on the board as an individual, that would you say that was unwielding to say, no, you can't trade on behalf of yourself? Well, in fact, you have inside information. Is that any more hard than what you're dealing with various firms who are being given huge underwriting and huge leverage advantages at the Federal Government's expense in return for trading primarily on our behalf?
And I think that's exactly the right difference. Is here these fund managers can have up to $3 billion of taxpayer money, and the whole design of the program is to encourage them to set prices in an illiquid market. This is a remarkable amount of power, and once they make that decision, it's a remarkable piece of inside information. I think that would be difficult for any member of Congress to replicate, because the design of the program is to set prices. So I think it's a far more extreme example in the example of the PPIP.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.